Stories of a Colorful World Authors Conversation. We are so honored to have children's book author and illustrator, uh, Daniel J. O'Brien. And it is so great to be able to talk to you today.
So great to be here.
Absolutely. So before we get started, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
All right, so I am Daniel J. O'Brien, of course. I am an illustrator, author, and all-around storyteller. Um, I've been a lover of art, illustration, everything geek as long as I can remember. But my work in the past decade has been not solely, but mainly focused on telling stories from the Caribbean. Be it my first book, The Carnival Prince, or my most recent book that just got released on Tuesday, I Am the Midnight Robin.
Awesome. What would you say is like your earliest memory of kind of like realizing that art was a passion for you?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I can pinpoint exactly what it was back in had to be 85, 86.
Okay.
And I had next door neighbors that lived a little, across the street, down the hill from me. And they were huge geeks as well. And they were watching Masters of the Universe on repeat, the live action movie. And they had the Dark Knight Returns, this prolific DC Batman comic book written and illustrated by Mark Miller. And even though I didn't realize it at the time, like that was probably a little too mature for who I was.
Okay.
But I was automatically attracted to just that form of storytelling.
Okay.
And from that point on, that's where it cemented. My grandfather, on my dad's side, who had passed away, was also an artist himself. And he would draw pictures for me. One of my earliest memories was him drawing the Superman cover from the Time magazine, like retracing it and giving it to me as a present.
Wow.
So it's always like that part of my life has always been prevalent. Art in any way, shape, or form, all things geek, any way, shape, or form.
Nice. So do you, like, when you were younger, was it more so like what type of books were you really into?
All right. So like I said, like comic books was my gateway into reading. Dark Knight Returns, Dragon Ball Z, Ninja Turtles, like all that stuff I'd get my hands on because, admittedly, I'm an illustrator first, so I was always attracted to the visual storytelling medium.
Absolutely.
And from there, I grew into like reading, like Peter Pan is one of my all-time favorite books. Love Dune. And it's like, as an adult, I do a lot more reading. So like anything by like Larry Correia, like one of my favorite, like, for lack of a better term, cheesy authors is Scott Sigler. Like he's an independent author himself.
Okay.
But he touches on a lot of really, for me, cool horror and sci-fi themes. So I gravitate towards his work as well. But as a kid, it was definitely like comic books that got me started. And then my chapter books, like things like, of course, Goosebumps and like Peter Pan is still one of my all-time favorite books.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So one of the things that you said was that you like tell stories from kind of like a Caribbean perspective.
Yes.
And like how has your like Trinidadian like culture kind of like inspired, or your roots kind of like inspired your work?
It didn't. So I'll be very, very honest. I moved up to the States when I was fairly young, about 8 or 9, and I was already in love with that geek culture. So like I fell in love with Saturday morning cartoons, sitting there with my Ninja Turtle cereal, and Trinidad. As much as I loved it, I never really touched upon the culture.
Okay.
Right? I was always like that. But my grandmother gave me a gift when I turned 18. And it's a very, very well known, like if you go to any Trinity bookstore, it's a book on folklore mythology. And I'm a sucker for folklore mythology. And when I found out the Caribbean has its own like history like this, like I automatically fell in love. And then I went to college, and I went to School of Visual Arts, and I'm trying to find myself. I went to school in Long Island, love my friends, but you're still like in a bubble, and you're not really allowed to grow outside that bubble. But when I went to SVA, I found a new group of friends, and at the same time, my art let me find myself. And my junior year, we had a art show, and we were asked to create folklore, like Greek mythology, or find a mythology and mix it with something you love, like create something themed out of that. It's like, okay. And then I was like, oh, that makes all the sense in the world.
Right up your alley.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to make carnival costume inspired paintings of Greek gods, goddesses.
Wow.
And my teacher at the time was like, you're going big, right? It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, you're going to make these paintings huge, right? It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, I see these being huge. It's like, all right. It's like, and I ended up making 4 foot by 2 foot paintings of models wearing Greek mythology style carnival costumes. And from there, that's where my love really started to grow, because there's so much to pull from in terms of the folklore, even down to the carnival culture. Like some of my favorite artists, one of my favorite artists is Peter Minshall, right? He's this prolific carnival creator, designer, right? He's done things like he's won Emmys for producing the opening ceremony for the Summer Olympics. Like he's on that level.
Okay.
And a lot of my work started to be geared towards that. Like if you see here, sorry, I'm going to move this out of the way real quick. Like this right here is this is a Kitty's Carnival costume that ultimately inspired the Carnival Prince.
Oh, wow.
Like this is me painting a child wearing a costume that I designed in my head. Like that's where it goes for me. And from that point on, like I just never left it. Like I try to include part of my culture in everything that I do, even though it's subtle. I try to include just down to the dialect that people use.
Which is interesting. So what kind of like inspired you to like add that author to your one of your titles?
I was walking through the airport with Trinidad one day. I went down for a family vacation, I was visiting family, and on the way back, like I was just looking for something to bring home that was inspiring. And I was walking through the airport looking for books, and I started realizing all the books geared towards children were of stories that have been told over and over and over again, and just lifted wholesale and just reprinted. And between you and me, the art was not up to snuff. Like it was just bad. And I'm sorry to be so critical, but like that's just the way I felt at the time.
Absolutely. And someone with a visual eye, you know, that's what you're attracted to. So that's the first thing you notice.
So I hopped on that plane with the full intent of now creating a story based in the Caribbean, borrowing from folklore, not taking folklore and reprinting it, but creating a new story for new generations that blend the culture. So to my loves, Trinidad carnival culture and folklore culture, and bringing that together. And you're gonna see like behind the paintings here, there's a blackboard, right? A wall that in my apartment, that's all blackboard.
Okay.
And I came home, and a week into it, on a Saturday night, I just started making a list on that wall. It's like, what can I do? And it all started to come together, like all the work I've done within that past decade prior. And I started building up. It's like, okay, this is a story that I have. Like this painting came before the Carnival Prince, but it helped inspire the Carnival Prince.
Right.
So that's how I got there. Okay.
So you've written and illustrated the Carnival Prince and your newest release, I Am the Midnight Robber. And they're both like inspired by that carnival culture. So for those who might not know, can you explain like what's the significance of carnival and kind of like the Midnight Robber character?
All right. So carnival itself is celebrated in some way, shape, or form throughout the world. Be it in Brazil, it's Mardi Gras. I'm sorry, it's like Brazil is carnival. Down south, New Orleans is Mardi Gras. It's celebrated all over the world. But ultimately what it is, carnival is that bacchanal lead up to Lent. Lent is a Christian Catholic period where you give up something, right? So and the week prior is just, as I know it, a time to just have fun, let loose, until you get to that Wednesday where you go to church and you get the ashes in your forehead and you start like Lent for those 40 days and 40 nights.
Absolutely.
And the carnival and the Midnight Robber character is probably one of the best known traditional mask characters, right? And what I mean by traditional mask is that back in the day, mask was known, like there's characters being played: Midnight Robber, the Dame Lorraine, Bat, and Dragon. In this day and age, it's more like beads and bikinis and people jumping up and down the streets. But there was like more it was more about the costuming back then. And the Midnight Robber is what we also call a busker, right? Person that dresses up in costume as this particular character, speaking what they call the robber's talk, being this huge, big, braggadocious character, scary character with a nod and a wink, but he's performing for you so you can now put money in his hat and he can go on his merry way. Like, that's who the Midnight Robber is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. So you actually released I Am the Midnight Robber on Carnival Tuesday.
Yes.
Yes. So how did that feel, and like why choose that day?
Well, to answer the second question first, it made all the sense in the world to me because this is a book about carnival. This is a book about traditional masks. Yes, I'm telling a universal story about a girl and her family and them all accepting that she wants to be this character more than anything else. But there's a huge space that was created because we are not living in the time of COVID, and Trinidad Carnival got canceled. And I remember towards the end of 2020, I was like, okay, I want to release this book. What is the best way to do it? And it was like, why not Carnival Tuesday? Like, there's that gap. Why not fill it with something fun, right? So with everything leading up to that, I was making sure to include the public as much as possible. All the promotions were geared towards getting people involved. Like, even down to, if you go to my Instagram page and you search for the filters I created costumes or like face filters based on the characters in the book, so people can now interact with this, give them that little sense of carnival. It's not the same, of course not, because like it is something to be experienced,
right?
But hopefully this would help with the kids and keep the tradition moving forward until the next year we can actually celebrate in person.
Absolutely. And during this time, we appreciate like those little joys even more, just having something and not feeling like we're missing out on
absolutely
things that we enjoy. So the Midnight Robber is traditionally played by like males.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'll back up with that just a little bit.
Okay.
Back in the day, yes.
Okay.
It's changing little by little as we go on.
Okay.
Even it's the look of the Midnight Robber is also creeping into the beads and bikinis portion of Carnival, but it's not necessarily the same because it's a costume you're not really performing.
Right.
It's something you're wearing to jump up and dance and have fun in the streets. But similar to another character called the Dame Lorraine,
right,
which is technically on the outside a female-looking character, were also played by men when this all really first started.
Okay.
And to this day, like an actual performer, a female performer as a Midnight Robber, is far and in between. Mm-hmm. But that's something I definitely wanted to touch on in the book. Like when I started writing this book, like in my head, I was like, I haven't seen this, right? Last year, there's a real, I wish I remember his name right now, but a really great photographer from Trinidad. And he went out of his way to create portraits of traditional masked characters, people in these costumes. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful portraits. And it's the first time I saw an adult woman wearing the Midnight Robber costume. I was like, wow, okay. I was like, should I just scrap this book? And I was like, no. This is still a story I wanted to tell.
Absolutely.
There's still relevance outside of just being an only female playing this character.
Absolutely. I absolutely loved kind of like the juxtaposition of like her name, Little Miss Sugarcane, versus her like bold, like braggadocious nature. Like it was, I absolutely love that.
That was absolutely on purpose. that was absolutely on purpose. You could have said it better. Like I could have said it better than you right now. Like I'm sure anybody that has dressed up in a Halloween costume before, or a costume in general, understands that there's this freedom that happens when you have that barrier of the mask between you and the outside world. And it just so happens with Sugarcane, this is how she finds herself. Right? This is who she wants to be. She enjoys being this character. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what you said that you kind of like as you envisioned it, what's kind of like your creative process as you're like envisioning the characters?
Okay, so with the Midnight Robber character, this sort of iteration was first introduced in the Carnival Prince, this right here, right? But in the Carnival Prince, I don't know if you can actually see, right? The Midnight Robber sitting right there. And the Midnight Robber in the very beginning was meant to be a grown man. And as I started writing and editing down, I was like, nope, it makes more sense. I'm going to age this character down to be like a little boy.
Okay.
Right. And then here we go. We're right there. Right. And moving on to my next project, like I enjoyed writing this character so much. I was moving forward and doing different projects with it. I sat down with a voice cast one day because we did an animated illustrated version of the book of the Carnival Prince. And I had gotten a female voice actress to play the Midnight Robber. And from that point on, it was hammered home. That's who I want this character to be.
Right.
Like, and it's like everything you talked about with the name being Sugarcane, like being this sweet little girl, but also being capable of being this rough and tough and tumble person made all this sense in the world to me. So that's how I started writing this book. And that's where the idea was to create this particular character. It evolved from the Carnival Prince to where it is now.
Okay. How many kind of like iterations of a character do you go through?
Oh, just in my head, hundreds, thousands. On paper, 10, 50, 100 times. I'll draw this character on that page over and over and over again until it makes sense, until that personality clicks with the form that I'm seeing on the page.
Nice. So particularly for your own works, how long does it take generally, and it may have been different from like Carnival Prince to I Am the Midnight Robber, but generally how long is the whole process for you?
All right. So when it's me writing and illustrating, like you said, it can be anywhere from the Carnival Prince, because it's my first time doing this.
Right.
Took me about 5 years to really get everything together.
Okay.
The Midnight Robber was a lot faster, give or take a year and a half. And then I've done smaller projects where it can like little comic strips.
Okay.
That I can put together in a week, not even, right? So it definitely varies. My illustration jobs that are solely illustration jobs, I can get those projects done because I'm getting the manuscript. They're asking me they want to get this done. I can have it done in 6 months and hand it off to you and go your merry way and have the world enjoy it.
Absolutely. Wow. So do you envision any more, do you envision creating more books, like particularly focusing on Carnival?
Absolutely. There's a not even Carnival per se.
Okay.
I'll be very honest. My next project, I'm going to be diving back into the world of the Carnival Prince.
Okay.
Right. That's my next story that I'm working on wholesale. But I also have short stories that I'll also be working on, trying to build on an anthology that are not only telling Carnival stories, but Caribbean stories as well. Be it that a Caribbean family living in Brooklyn, right, or Toronto, or straight up like living down south in Trinidad, it's like by Dom Miaro, like telling those stories. I want the anthology to show people that we are everywhere. We as Caribbean people are everywhere. And
Right.
even though we may not say it, like we quietly represent who we are. I can name six um, stars, six artists, authors that are quietly Caribbean,
Hmm.
right? But they, it's just a lot of pride knowing that that's where they're from.
Right. So what does, kind of like thinking in that vein, like what does diverse representation in children's books mean to you?
It means everything to me. That's the main reason why the Colorful Prince exists. Yes, I wanted to tell a new story, but at the same time, it means so much seeing a person of color on the page be the hero, being the person up front, being the person telling their own story. Um, Going back to growing up geek, right? I can probably name on one hand all the heroes of color that I looked up to. And within the past 10 years alone, seeing that number just grow exponentially. And then, perfect example is Enter the Spider Verse. Like, watching that movie nearly brought me to tears for so many different reasons. It's a heartfelt story about a brown kid in Brooklyn, right, getting to be the hero, you know. And if that doesn't make you tear up just a little bit, like I don't know what does. You
Right.
know, it's like also like watching Wonder Woman for the first time, like seeing this larger than life character that was been relegated to just a comic book for so many years get that starring role, and seeing this character grow up in front of you. Understanding what it actually means. Black Panther's another example. That's what I want to do. I want to create those stories that inspire and let those kids see that they're being represented on the page.
Absolutely. And just imagine, you know, kids growing up now and what they see and like the images that are in front of them and that they experience on the screen in their books, and what that does for them.
Exactly. Absolutely. Like I know what it does for me, so I can only imagine what
Right,
it does for them.
right. Right. So you released both the Carnival Prince and I Am the Midnight Robber independently.
Yes.
And so how does that feel, like knowing, um kind of like knowing you, like the success of it is really tied into like all of the things that you worked hard for and like the story that you wanted to tell.
Um, it's a feeling I'm still getting used to. It's one thing getting a gig through another publisher, doing that project and handing it off.
Right.
I can honestly say that the Carnival Prince and that world is my baby. And the Midnight Robber also, to a certain extent, is my baby. Like I wrote it, I illustrated it, you know, had other people edit it, and I'm putting this out in the world, and I'm putting a lot of effort behind it to make sure as many people see it as possible. So it's amazing. It is rewarding. It's exhausting all at the same time. But at the end of the day, it's something that I feel that's very, very necessary. I'm not knocking traditional publishing at all. Like of course, I would love to get into that world and create books and work with different authors to create something beautiful, right? But at the same time, I understand that sometimes if you want to write an authentic story, you have to write your own story and let it sit where it is. With the Carnival Prince, when I did that and I was going through the editing process, I made sure to find editors that were from the Caribbean,
Mm,
right? That would relate to that material, so they're not sitting there crossing out lines like, oh well, this doesn't make any sense, and not necessarily know why that reference is there. And same thing with I'm the Midnight Robber. Like I wrote this book specifically in a particular dialect, right? So when you're reading it, it has that sing-songy way of speaking like Trinidadians do, right? And at the end, I purposely break out of that to emphasize like she's the midnight robber. Like the first time you actually see the word "the" in the book, right, to emphasize like this is who she is, this is who she always wanted to be, and it all came to fruition. Like I was doubting it for a while I was like, should I do this? Should I not do this? But it made all the sense in the world to me when I got a video on Monday of a little boy reading lines from the book. He's from Trinidad.
Okay.
And it sounded exactly like I wanted it to sound in my head. Like when I was writing this, when I was reading out loud, and my wife is looking over the computer at me funny because like, you're reading for the 100th time. Like I wanted this to sound a very specific way. I wanted so like a Trinidadian kid got this in their hands and they're reading it. It makes all the sense in the world to them. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy I did it that way. And I don't, if I went to another, like a publisher and tried to sell that, I wouldn't be able to sell it. You know, there's only so much of that you can get away with because yes, they need to sell to a wider audience.
Right.
And I get it. I absolutely get it. But I wanted the story to feel authentic, you know, # own voices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you take away that authenticity when it's not in, you know, like if this character is definitely representing Trinidadian culture, Caribbean culture, carnival, then like how would this character speak? And how do we make sure that, you know, people hear that authenticity and like celebrate that authenticity as well?
And it's like also to keep in mind the Midnight Robber is a performance character, right? You're turning up that side of it,
right.
Like when you become that character. You know, I have family, I have friends that are from Trinidad. Like not every Trini speaks exactly the same, but the Midnight Robber has a very particular voice, and I wanted to emphasize that.
Nice. So February, our Stories of a Colorful World's like theme of the month is like equality.
Mm-hmm.
And so what word, phrase, or maybe like quote represents kind of like equality for you?
Are you from the book or just in general?
Just in general.
Ooh, you put me on the spot. I wouldn't even say it's a phrase. It's the understanding that I'm going to take this back to the book.
Okay.
It's the understanding that the Midnight Robber is not only for boys. The Midnight Robber is a character that is performed by anybody and everybody. And it should not be left up to your gender to become that, to embrace that character. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Which is like one of the many things that makes this book so special.
Thank you.
And also thinking about, you know, because there's often this idea of characters that are, let's say, male or female traditionally are only for boys or girls.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is not actually for the masses. And that how do we then become how do we then like normalize this is for everybody? How do we, you know, we want to make traditions and normal everyday life something that kids are able to see because these are the things that they're going through, or you know, seeing other people do things that they may not they may have not seen before.
The generation I see after me, it seems a lot easier to welcome everybody and into not to welcome, but like not to generalize, not to place everybody in one particular thing. Like all are welcome to be who you want, when you want, how you want. And for the older generations that don't necessarily understand that, to a certain extent, my personal feeling about it is like, it's not for you to understand.
Right.
It's for you to understand that the world's changing and that's okay. Right? What was good for you back in the 80s or 70s or even 90s.
Right.
Like when you take it out of context, you realize, ooh, that probably wasn't the best. Like in the best place to really be. And the generation now, they don't have it figured out themselves. Like, we don't know what's going to be 100 years down the road, but it's
Right.
constantly evolving, and it's not, once again, it's not for you to understand, but really think about it. Don't close yourself off to how a person feels, or choose not even choose to be who a person is. Don't
Right.
close yourself off to that, because you're closing yourself off to so many different avenues and learning new things and experiencing new things.
Absolutely. So did you find that during like this time of like COVID kind of like shut in a sense, did you find yourself feeling like more creative?
Whew. Thank goodness that I was already working on I'm the Midnight Robber,
Okay.
because I can speak for myself and a few of my other artist friends. It was a very hard time to be creative,
Mm,
not because there wasn't things to work from. It's just that when they came up, it was painful to work from.
right.
We spoke about before we jumped on, and the BLM movement, and when the protests started happening, and understanding the tone and why they were happening, and wanting to create in that zone, but having to become emotionally ready to do so. Like, a lot of my artist friends of color, this is also something spoke about, like, they were being approached left and right by agents, by editors. It's like, we want you to create this now. Like, we want you, it's like, how do you feel about this now? It's like, yo, we are in this moment trying to figure it out for ourselves. Like, this is brand new for us,
Right.
right? Like, we are hurting now, and now you're asking us to create something when the hurt is still very fresh,
Right.
right? There's only one thing I was able to create, like a small comic strip, and even creating that. I remember posting it in the morning on Instagram, and about to walk out that door, and feeling like I was about to break down, because it was emotionally just, it hurts, because it was like in the very midst of everything happening, and once again, you're still trying to figure everything out as you go along.
Right.
If you go back in my feed at Daniel O Studios, there's a comic strip I put together called Conflicted,
Okay.
and it told the story of the protests in front of the White House. Um, but it ends with one of the National Guard soldiers, and you're realizing this National Guard soldier who's tasked with protecting the White House, protecting the Capitol, right, is also a black man,
Mm,
having to deal with watching his people march for something he believes in, but also having to stand on the sidelines and protect an institution
right.
that has created that environment for this to happen. Yeah, it's also, it was based on an actual video that went around of a
Hmm.
National Guard soldier, where people were marching in the streets and yelling Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and you saw this National Guardsman standing on by his tank, um, and you started zooming in, and you're realizing that he was mouthing, he wasn't yelling, but he was whispering along with them, Black Lives Matter,
Mm,
and this look of, like, he was conflicted,
right.
like,
Right.
what am I doing here? Like, it's like, I would love to meet him, and find out his story, like how he really felt in that moment, because we're pulling our own stories out of this,
Right.
but that look on his face, like that, like, it broke my heart,
Right.
like watching him be in that situation.
Right. It definitely is like just thinking about like someone being conflicted in that moment, and even thinking about the events on January 6th and the guards that have to be in that moment and enduring, the police officers also like enduring the slurs and like all of these different things, and
Mm-hmm.
still trying to hold the line.
There's a certain type, you know in that moment, I want to believe that you're acting off of years of training, and also there's also a fight or flight thing
Right.
happening right there, right? But I was more concerned about when these cops were away from the situation and now had to come down and really process what happened. And we both know, we all know what happened to three of those cops, what ended up happening, right? And then you have the countless cops that resigned, because the police officers that resigned because, like, this is what I was, my duty to protect. These people that I don't necessarily want to get political,
Right.
but you screaming "Blue Lives Matter" while beating a cop down with American flag.
Right.
That, yeah.
The irony.
Yes.
The irony. So let me ask you this. Do you have any advice that you would give to any like aspiring either writers or illustrators?
Yeah. I have a. Can I tell a story behind that?
Absolutely.
All right. So one of my trips to Trinidad, I was sitting next to a little kid, and I was drawing. I was sketching, passing the time on the plane down there, and the kid reaches over to me and it's like, "Hey, I'm an artist too." It's like, do you mind if I show you my sketch? I was like, "Absolutely. Let me see what you can do." And he pulled out his book, and he's a huge anime fan and drawing all these anime characters. And he's like, "Do you have any advice for me?" He's like, "Yeah." It's like, "Where you're from Trinidad, right?" It's like, "Yes." "You have family from Trinidad?" It's like, "Yeah." It's like, "Find out about your family story." Right? It's like, don't get me wrong, like, I love what you're doing here, but I'm sure you have your own story to tell. I'm sure your family has a pretty amazing story to tell themselves. Right? Find that story out. And ultimately, like, we can tell our stories the best because we have that experience. We've lived it. We have family members have lived it. Why not tell that story?
Right.
Find a way to make it be interesting, and don't be afraid to tell your own story.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So, are you currently reading any good books?
Right now I am reading Slocky, science fiction.
Okay.
Right now I'm reading Scott Sigler's Mount Fitzroy.
Hmm.
So I'm about a quarter of the way through that. Let me see. I'm gonna get the most. It's like there's a series that I read recently that I thought was absolutely amazing by Bear with me. Bear with me. I want to get this right. Um, Author Lamar Giles.
Ah, yes.
I am a huge fan of his work. So you got The Last Days of Summer and The
Yes.
Last Man on the Left. And from there, I found one of his older books called Fake ID,
Huh.
which was pretty amazing. And then the one after that is the Singularity Trap by Dennis E. Taylor. So like a far-flung science fiction. Like, I'm a huge fan of science fiction. Like, you're gonna find a lot of that in what I read. But
Okay.
like Lamar Giles is one of my favorites right now.
Okay.
So I'm waiting for the next book in that series to come out. Like, any middle grader
Yep.
that wants to see like brown boys being their best and telling a real, true, heartfelt story, definitely pick up The Last Days of Summer or The Last Mirror on the Left. It's amazing stories.
Absolutely. Um, do you have any projects you're currently working on?
Yes. So right now, like I said, I'm diving back into the world of Carnival Prince. Um, I'm working on a few things. Nothing has been solidified, so I don't necessarily want to put it out there just yet.
Okay.
But it's that and the anthology, the two things I'm working on. On March 1st, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. I have another book that I illustrated coming out called The Talking Mango Tree with Caribbean Reads, written by A.H. Benjamin, who is a prolific English kidlit picture book author who has about 50 titles under his belt over a span of 30 years.
Wow.
And I got to illustrate his latest book, which is pretty amazing. We've got pretty great reviews coming out. I'm excited for that. This is the first time that I've had two books come out within a month of each other. So I had no clue how to attack that. It's like, how do I promote one and not the other? Right. So once again, I'll be remiss if I didn't say, if you guys are looking for just a fun take on an old parable, like a straightforward picture book, definitely look up The Talking Manga Tree by myself, and written by A.H. Benjamin.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll definitely have to also like leave that in the comments so people can check that out as well.
All right.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. How can people stay connected with you?
All right. So you can find my work at www.danielstudios.com. You can find me more on Instagram. That's where I update almost daily at Daniel O Studios. You can find me on Facebook, and you can find me on Twitter. You can also find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Daniel O Studios. I'm there just about every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 6 to 9,
Oh, wow.
just talking, just sketching. If anybody has any questions about my process or just art in general, I'm there to answer your questions.
Awesome. And we'll definitely drop those links in the comments below.
Very nice. Very cool.
And you can also find both the Carnival Prince and I Am the Midnight Robber in our SOCW Authors Conversation collection in our bookshop. So we'll drop that link as well so you can make sure that you get your copies of I Am the Midnight Robber. I'm telling you, you have to pick it up.
Thank you. Oh, can I I've been working on this for a while. Can I do my comp presentation of it real quick?
Absolutely.
All right. Yes. So if you love Ada Twist Scientists for the rhyming and just the pure fun nature of it, I recommend this book. If you love Julian is a Mermaid, one of my favorite books by Jessica Love, that's just a story about hearts and a kid coming to his own and learning to be himself with the help of his family. It's Ada Twist and Julian's a Mermaid just mashed together in all its fun, glory, and hearts. So pick it up.
And you will not be disappointed.
Thank you.
So thank you again. We are so excited that we had Daniel J. O'Brien with us today. And just a reminder, don't forget, we are also, remember, our February theme for this month is equality, and you can find our picks of the month on our website, www.storiesofacolorfulworld.com. And have a great evening. Thank you
so
so
guys.
much.
See you later.